Hello, visionary people of Entheo Nation. I am here today with a very special guest who I met over 10 years ago in the Peruvian Amazon in Iquitos at the very first Ayahuasca conference started by Alan Shoemaker. So my special guest today is Dennis McKenna, who is the brother of the late Terence McKenna. Now, Dennis is an ethnopharmacologist. He is the founding board member of the Heifer Research Institute and the assistant professor of the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota. Now, Dennis has studied plant hallucinogens for over 30 years, and with ayahuasca as his specialty of focus. So in this episode today, Dennis will share with us his thoughts about ayahuasca and human destiny. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dennis.
Thank you, Lorna, for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I am very intrigued by your professional history, and your bio says that you've been studying plant hallucinogens for over 30 years. So I'd love to discover how you got into all of that and which plants you've had the opportunity to study.
Well, that's a long story, but like a lot of little brothers, I guess I was led down the primrose path by my big brother, Terence. Back in the 60s, we shared an intense interest in psychedelics, and that was kind of the meme of the day. That was what was happening, but we were very dissatisfied with the sort of late 60s social context. It was like there was no model for psychedelics in our society, and when LSD came along, it sort of was dropped like a bomb into the middle of society, and suddenly there was, the only spokesman for it was Timothy Leary, and he kind of had his own agenda, and he was really as clueless as everybody else, and so we were excited when we discovered that there is actually a shamanic tradition around the use of these plant medicines, that many groups, especially in the New World, have been using these things for thousands of years, and in their shamanic practices. So we figured, well, if we're serious about psychedelics, we have to go down there and talk to these, gentlemen and sometimes ladies who use these plant medicines in the context of their own traditional medicine. So that's what led us to go to South America for the first time in 1971. And we were looking for a very obscure hallucinogen that no one's ever heard of, or few people even today have heard of, called Uku-hei, derived from a completely different set of plants than ayahuasca, but a similar pharmacology in the sense that it has DMT, which is the main psychedelic component, but it's an orally active form of DMT, like ayahuasca. And so we were looking for that plant because our experiences with synthetic DMT in Berkeley in the 60s were amazing, but not satisfying in the sense that all they were was amazing. We couldn't come back with any real information from those experiences. So we were motivated to go down and find a natural form of DMT that would last longer, so that we could, that was our assumption, that it would last longer so that we could actually kind of stick around in that dimension and see what was going on. Because, if you've taken synthetic DMT, it's a very short experience. There's a whole lot going on. It's quite overwhelming, but it's very hard to get a handle on it and bring much back that's useful other than, oh wow, or something like that, So we were motivated to go to South America to look for Uku-hei. At the time, the pharmacology and chemistry of ayahuasca wasn't very well understood. It wasn't even clear that it was DMT, that it, and about about the same time we were doing this work, all the work on the admixtures, the importance of the admixture plants, chacruna and chagrapanga and these other DMT-containing admixtures was just being sorted out, by Schultes, Ari Schultes, the famous botanist, and his graduate students. And then, if you've read my book or any of Terrence's book, you know that, we went to this place called La Chorrera in Colombia, in the Colombian Amazon, in search of Uku-hei.
So who uses Uku-hei and how do they use it?
Well, it's the Witoto Indians primarily, the Witoto groups and a couple of closely related groups. And that's why we went to La Chorrera, because that was their ancestral home, and so we figured that's where we have to go to find it. They use it, it's in that group. Uku-hei is a dying tradition, as indeed the cultures themselves are highly impacted. They're if you want to look at an indigenous tribe that's in the process of basically, falling apart under the impact of global forces, the Witoto are a good case study for that. So when we went there, even at that time, the knowledge of the use of Uku-hei was known to only a few people, and it's kind of a shamanic secret, and it wasn't necessarily used for spiritual exploration. It was more like it was used in sorcery and that sort of thing. I mean, the way that Uku-hei was used in that culture, it was not in a particularly nice way. I mean, it was a way for one shaman to, put the whammy on another shaman. And
is it a beverage?
The traditional context, the way that ayahuasca is used in mestizo culture, it's not all fuzzy bunnies and happy hippies. I mean,
there's some serious sorcery going on, like people throwing hexes and counter hexes and, throwing energetic darts and making people sick. I mean, I feel blessed that I did not get caught up in anything sketchy in Peru, and that most of my ayahuasca experiences in Brazil, where it's almost like so much more gentle and, safe and Disneyland-like in a certain way, I guess.
Yeah. In Brazil, though, you often encounter it in the context of these religions, like the Santo Daime and the UDV, and it's not really a traditional use. They have adopted ayahuasca, and they use it as a sacramental way. So, but in the context of what's essentially a Christian, practice, and their use of it is much more like the way that Native Americans use peyote. It's a much more sacramental.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny.
They don't even admit that it's a medicine. I mean, they don't even like the notion that it's a medicine. And of course, because then that means, it's a drug, and they're seriously interested in denying that it is a drug. You can't call our sacrament a drug. That's insulting. But the shamans in the Peruvian tradition are of course it's a medicine. It's all about medicine. And you can use medicine for harm or for good. And now, of course, we're seeing this mestizo tradition of vegetalismo or curanderismo or whatever you'd like to call it is being transformed again in response to the Western influences. So people are modifying their practices because they have a clientele. They have these foreigners that are coming down, paying them more money than they ever imagined they'd ever see to do these ceremonies. So they're tailoring their practices to that, and really sort of not emphasizing the sorcery and which still goes on, but that's not it. They've sort of created this new agey neo-shamanism.
Yeah, kind of like the ayahuasca retreats, for psychological breakthroughs and healing and therapy, that kind of thing. I mean, the groups of people, that are gathering together. I mean, my experience with the tribes, granted, was that, if it was a group, it was like the village, getting together, or, you went to see the shaman when you were sick, and it was like you and the shaman. So these like groups of people spending a week doing a dieta seems like a fairly new phenomenon, would you say?
Yeah, it's a new phenomenon. It's really only gotten, it's sort of started out this way. There were a few ayahuasca pilgrims early on. I guess I was one when I went to do my graduate work in 1981, but it really didn't get rolling until the early 90s, and it really didn't turn into a flood of people into Iquitos. Really, probably Alan's conference had a lot to do with it, and because that was, it was noticed by lots of people. Before that, in 1991, Luis Eduardo and Pablo Amaringo's publication of the book Ayahuasca Visions was another catalyst. That book was on the shelves of many bookstores, and people with an interest in psychedelics, that was maybe the first time that they really encountered ayahuasca in a very attractive way. The book is beautiful. Pablo's paintings are lovely, and and it presents it in a very good light. And I think and it's in English, right? So it brought it to the attention of a lot of people, and that was a catalytic force in the development of this ayahuasca tourism phenomenon, which I do not think is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's actually quite a good thing. But there are, issues. Anytime a global culture interfaces with a fragile, more or less indigenous cultures, there are going to be sparks, and there are going to be abuses on both sides, and it's complicated.
I want to bookmark that conversation because it's a very deep conversation. I definitely want to have it, but I also want to, go back to time, to when you were in the jungle in the 70s, researching Uku-hei. Now, we had kind of segued into the sorcery of it all. I'm kind of curious, is it a snuff? Is it a beverage? Or, how do people take the Uku-hei, and what was that like for you?
It's a paste. It's made from the sap of various species of trees in the genus Virola, Virola. It's a member of the nutmeg family. It produces a reddish brown sap. Now,
does that have any relationship to yopo?
Exactly, it's the same plant.
Oh, I did that as a snuff actually last year.
Right. Many groups use it as a snuff. So they powder it down, they completely dry it out, and then they powder it up and they take it as a snuff. This is an orally active form where they just concentrate it into this sticky, gooey stuff, and they make little pills out of it. Actually, pretty big pills, like that. And then you take it orally. And
what does it do?
Well, that's complicated. It's because the tradition is degraded and the knowledge is lost. The knowledge of actually how to make it and which plants to use is sort of dying, and so this was a focus of my graduate studies when I went back in 1981 to investigate this as a graduate student. I didn't go back to La Chorrera, but I went to another Huitoto population center in Peru, the Rio Ampiacu. But what I found was that most of the people that I interviewed said, well, we sort of remember, my grandfather was into this, I don't really know, I sort of remember how to do it. And, they would take a crack at it and they would make it for us. And we bioassay bioassay them. And, we got about 7 samples from 7 different shamans. 3 of them were sort of active, 1 of them was highly active, and the other ones were completely inactive. So, it's a difficult thing to study. But
so, do you remember what the highly active sample that you had did to you?
Yes, I do. I wrote it down. I kept notes, actually. And it wasn't pleasant. It was sort of like an overdose of 5-methoxy-DMT.
Ooh,
And,
that sounds kind of scary, actually.
It was kind of scary. I was convinced at some point in the proceedings that I was probably not going to survive. But I did, of course. Most people do these things,
Yeah, at that point you have to tell yourself, oh my God, I just have to ride it out.
Yeah, but when I got it back to the lab and actually did the analysis on this sample, it turned out, yes, it was in fact 5-methoxy-DMT at very high levels and very little else. The typical spectrum with the Varrolas is there's DMT and 5-methoxy and other tryptamine derivatives. But there's a great deal of chemical variation between species and all that. So that's another reason I think why this knowledge, it's tricky. You really have to know the right species and how to prepare them in order to have an effective preparation. And that knowledge is lost. It's not as simple to make as ayahuasca.
So this first experience with Uku-hei was what opened your world to psychoactive plant medicines. From there, you just kept...
No. I had I have to go back to 1971 at La Chirera. When my brother and I arrived at La Chirera, we were looking for Uku-hei, and we thought that's the real mystery. What we found at La Chirera was that it was a place about 200 acres had been cleared, and they had Cebu cattle brought in, the white humpbacks cattle. So out of every cow pie were these beautiful clusters of psilocybin Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms, and we knew what those were. We had no experience with them, very little experience, but we knew what they were. And we thought at the time, oh, that's great. These are around. We can enjoy these while, we're waiting for the Uku-hei to show up. And that's the real mystery. Well, we were quickly disabused of that notion because actually the psilocybin mushrooms turned out to be, for us, the real mystery. And now I have to plug my book because this is a long story. It's all laid out in my memoir, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, and it's a long, complicated story, and I'm afraid if I try to explain it all here, we won't have time for anything else.
Okay, so we'll definitely experience that part of your history through the book. So,
yeah.
So you've studied plant hallucinogens for over 30 years. What is your current work now with plant hallucinogens?
Well, a couple of different things. Since I've been working, hosting these retreats, organizing these retreats in the Sacred Valley, that's partly what I'm doing. But I'm still very interested in the chemistry and pharmacology of ayahuasca, and I'm very interested in the admixture plants. And ayahuasca exists at at the center of a whole pharmacopoeia of plants. There are the well-known ones, the DMT-containing plants that are used almost always in the making of ayahuasca. It's really not ayahuasca without those, but there are about 150 other species of plants that are associated with ayahuasca. Either they're taken with ayahuasca or they're used to diet before or after taking ayahuasca. A lot of these plants are not well investigated.
And they also have DMT?
Nobody knows. No, they don't. That's the reason. That's what I mean. They're pharmacologically active, but their chemistry is either completely unknown or rather poorly known. So and a lot of these have the reputation of being hallucinogens or psychedelics in their own right. So I'm interested in investigating that, and that's kind of what I'm focusing on now. That's a whole ethnobotany. There's 2 or 3 PhD theses here for some enthusiastic graduate student, if I ever find one, to do this work. I think that's interesting. And then the other side, my other interest is in the clinical work with ayahuasca. We discussed the difficulties of doing that work here with ayahuasca, but I've said because of the FDA and because of these silly restrictions on plant medicines, but I've been advocating and urging my colleagues to say, well, what do we need the FDA for? Why don't we just step out of that whole box and do the work in Peru, where ayahuasca is recognized, it's a national patrimony, it's legal, and so the whole regulatory framework is very different, and you could do good, well-structured, well-designed clinical studies with ayahuasca in Peru. And actually, it's probably better from an ethical standpoint because, you're not taking an indigenous plant medicine and ripping it out of its context and turning it over to the pharmaceutical industry, which I don't really want to see happen. Actually, I don't think there's much chance of it. You couldn't pay them to get interested in ayahuasca. Unless they saw that there was money to be made. I don't really think there is.
Why not? I'm curious. Why not?
Why don't they think there's money to be made?
I mean, it seems like it's such a powerful plant. There could be so many therapeutic benefits to ayahuasca. Maybe if they were to, derive some type of compound from it that is effective in treating depression. I'm kind of curious, why Western medicine is not interested in this plant.
Well, because for numerous reasons. For one thing, the chemistry and pharmacology is well understood. These compounds are known. DMT and beta carbolines. There's no patents to be had off this. And the fact is, the pharmaceutical industry is not interested in medicines that you might take 2 or 3 times in your lifetime. There's no profit there. They want you to take medicines that you take 4 times a day for the rest of your life, right? Because their real agenda is to make money. If it happens to help people, that's fine, but that's not the primary agenda. The primary agenda is to make money. So there's no business model for psychedelics in that sense. The business model, that may emerge is around these centers. The idea that you can establish a place where people can come and either with shamanic guidance or even psychotherapeutic guidance, people can have these experiences and benefit from that and address problems that they may have, like PTSD, addictions, depression, and these sorts of things, or just spiritual exploration, but the idea that you create a safe place where this can be done, and that's the whole rationale behind these treatment centers, or these retreat centers, I should say. And what I want to do, since I insist, for whatever reason, that there should at least be a little bit of science behind these things, I want to do some fairly structured and fairly well-designed clinical studies in Peru for PTSD. And that's an obvious therapeutic target, and there are a lot of people suffering, and that would be the first one. There are others as well, but that's kind of the one that we can approach. So I expect to get that study underway in the next year to 18 months, something like that. I mean, there have been, you may have seen the piece on CNN with Lisa Ling.
I missed that actually, but she's. First saw her, video documentaries or investigations years ago when she was a reporter or independent journalist for Current TV. So she spent time in the Amazon actually exploring, just kind of like drug trafficking and other topics there. So it wouldn't surprise me that she'd actually, do something about ayahuasca, given that she spent a lot of time in the Amazon. I'm sure it would have come across her radar. So what was that? What was that episode about? Because I missed it.
Well, I advised the producers of the show, which is an independent film company called Part 2 Pictures. Good people, good journalists, really trying to do a good job. I advised them quite extensively before they went down. They had basically ignored all my advice. They went to a place I'd never heard of outside Iquitos, and they had some vets with them. They worked with a guy named Ryan LeCompte, who you may have heard of. He's founded an organization called Vets for Entheogenic Therapy, and he took some of his people down, I think about 8 people with him who had been diagnosed with PTSD, and they had, they had a session, and I think they had more than one, but they only filmed one. And, not definitive. Most people felt that it was beneficial for them, but it's not like there were miracle cures or anything. That's not the way these things work. But it was an interesting piece. I wouldn't have been the one I made, but I was just impressed that CNN, for whatever reason, was bold enough to, put this on and actually show ayahuasca in a fairly positive light. I mean, I think people that watched it either had a positive impression or kind of were scratching their heads, but I don't think people had a really negative impression. It wasn't like, oh my God, these people are coming down and taking this psychedelic drug, and and that's often what you get in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I know, or Hollywood portrayals of ayahuasca as, some kind of crazy making, drug that allows you to gain control over, stray cats and make them, kill your victim at will, That was an episode I saw in The X-Files, and I just was like, this is so not ayahuasca. Where are these people getting these ideas?
It's a symptom of I think our culture. It's a symptom of how what a distorted lens, if you want to use that term, that people look through who are not familiar with the culture. To them these are strange people, strange exotic culture, kind of scary, and then they have this bitter brew that tastes terrible and makes people go nuts. And the scene. This is not how it is at all.
Well, I think it's a good thing that there's more, neutral or positive accounts of ayahuasca in the mainstream media. So, I definitely see like that. It's alone is actually what I think is really resulting in much more global awareness about ayahuasca. So, like maybe 10 years ago, no one knew what ayahuasca, was. And now it seems like I'm meeting so many people who want to have an ayahuasca experience, or, other people who have spent some time in the jungle and are now serving ayahuasca, which I have opinions about. And, so it seems like it's definitely making its way into the global community. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this in terms of how that happened and whether or not it's a good thing.
You love to ask the multi-level questions, don't you?
Well,
which is fine, but they're complex, so it takes time to unpack them.
Okay, let's try to unpack this.
But what you have said is absolutely true. It's making its way onto a global stage, and I view it actually personally. This is not a scientific view, but I'm not always a scientist. I'm a scientist every other Tuesday or whatever, But and the personal view, I think this is a manifestation of this long coevolutionary relationship that ayahuasca's had with the human species. Humans have a coevolution. Humans have a symbiotic relationship, if you will, with any plant species that is useful to us. That doesn't have to be psychoactive. We have a symbiotic relationship with corn, or other plants. But the plants that contain these neuroactive chemicals are kind of special because they are the teacher plants, right? And they're the ones that, in the context of indigenous cultures in South America, they call them. These are the plants that teach. And in fact, they do teach. And what they're trying to teach us is wake up, basically. Wake up, you monkeys, because you're wrecking the planet. And I view it as, that ayahuasca's emerged onto the global stage almost out of desperation. It's feel like, it's been happy to stay in the Amazon and be the sort of, let the indigenous people look after it. But now things are getting desperate. And so it needs to get out to a wider audience. And so it's gone global, and between its power coupled with the power of the internet, and you see this phenomenon emerging. It's decided it's got, I'm anthropomorphizing it, obviously, but in some sense, I think this is kind of what the biosphere, the Gaian mind, if you will, is putting this forward to our species and saying, here's our delegate from the community of species that are really concerned about you guys, because you don't seem to be able to wake up. And so wake up already and, and understand a few things. I think this is the main message that ayahuasca's bringing forth in this coevolutionary sense. Now we're looking at a small slice of time, right? Coevolution is a process that unfolds over millennia and many millennia. It's a slow process. We look at, ayahuasca's only been known to Western scientists since the 1850s, and so we're looking at a very small slice of time that it's been known to the Western mind, if you will. And so you can't draw out too many conclusions about what's happening in this historical juncture. I think there are going to be rough spots, right? And there clearly are rough spots. Some of these centers are, not places you'd send your sister to. There's a lot of abuse of women. There's a lot of power tripping. There's a lot of, weird brews that you don't know what's in them. And in any kind of cult situation, these are kind of culties. There's often a person who, is attracted to the power, and they come at it from a power standpoint. They want to control people. They want to be like a guru, except they're the shaman. If I encounter shamans who work from that I don't know what you call it, operating mode,
paradigm.
I run the other way. What I want to see in a shaman is a guy or a gal who is humble, because the humility tells me that they've learned from the medicine, and so they've learned that there's nothing to be arrogant about. There's nothing to, because what ayahuasca teaches you, or at least what it's taught me over many, many years of using it, is I don't know shit. That's the lesson. That's that's what it teaches you. Remember that you don't know shit. And I hope I can use that word in a family podcast.
We'll have to mark it explicit on iTunes.
Okay, all right. But really, that's the message. The message is, remember that you don't know very much, and remember also that you're not running things, right? That you monkeys only think you're running things. We're not running things. We are part of nature. We don't own nature. It's not here for us to exploit. It's here for us to be part of and to be nurtured by, and for us to nurture nature to the extent that we can without fucking it up, without destroying it. And that's the message it's trying to propagate to humanity, I think, on a global scale, are kind of these basic re-understandings about our relationship to nature, and the fact that we're part of it, and we're part of the problem. We have to become part of the solution, or we're not going to survive. Nature will get along fine without us. I'm not concerned about the survival of life on Earth, at least not right away, although we are dealing with some pretty powerfully destructive technologies that we could actually undermine the conditions on Earth so that it's inhospitable to all life. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we'll be gone long before that. But the sad part is, why should we? If we just change our consciousness, and this is what these medicines are giving us the chance to do, if we open ourselves to learning and re-understanding that we have to change how we view nature, and we can't do that without changing how we view each other and how we view ourselves, and all these fundamental consciousness shifts that ayahuasca can help us with. And so I guess I've kind of answered the question, do I think it's a good thing? Yes, I think it's a good thing.
So with the acceleration...
It's part of this evolutionary process.
Mm-hmm. So with the acceleration of ayahuasca on the global scene, what do you think that's going to do for human society and evolution in the next 50 to 100 years? Will this phenomenon make us wiser and more sustainable, or do you think that that it's going to result in a big backlash from the powers that be? Which is another thread altogether. There's the awakening part, and then there's, of course, the powers that be that are threatened by the awakening. But I'm hoping that the awakening can reach more people, so that those who are in a position to make change from within can do that, so that, it doesn't end up being some, occupied movement where, the folks get together in en masse, and it seems like nothing's changing.
Yeah, what you say, I could have said exactly the same thing. Hopefully this co-evolutionary relationship, after we get through the bumps and after we learn how to use it in a way that is, supportive and life-affirming and all that, and not in the service of, some cult, some power agenda or whatever, then hopefully it will make us wiser, and more compassionate for each other and for nature, and it will foster this shift in consciousness, which we desperately need, because if we don't wise up, and fast, we're not going to be able to make the global changes that we need to ensure that we survive and really that nature survives, So we need to use this medicine, and it's offering itself, freely in a way. It's so we need to take best advantage of that if possible. Now, as far as the pushback from the powers that be. I think one way to avoid that is, and one of the things that are important, as you said, it's inherently subversive. Ayahuasca is. So, the power is that you need to get it into the hands and into the gullets of people who are in a position to make a change, right? The thought leaders, the financial leaders, the corporate leaders, the government leaders, all these people, who are not necessarily bad people. They've just been involved in this, bad situation for so long but ultimately, I think, ayahuasca can change hearts and minds. We know that it does, and it needs to change the hearts and minds of the people who are in a position to then propagate that thing and avoid the Occupy Wall Street mentality, where you've got a group of marginalized people who really want things to change but are basically powerless to make that happen. You've got to get it to the people that can make it happen. Another reason why these centers in South America are so important, or wherever they are, because the center I work with, I can bring groups down to this place, Wilcatica, and sitting in the room, there is financial capacity and corporate capacity, $500 billion sitting in the room. Not that people's values are based only on money, but you know what I mean. There's, and so even people in the corridors of power, in governments and corporations and wherever, they also sense that, we do have a planetary crisis, and they don't have a clue any more than anybody else what to do about it. So I think they're also sincere. They're also looking for answers, and ayahuasca can be very helpful to them. We have to, we have to get to a point where we can have these conversations with people who, normally we'd walk across the street to avoid in a certain sense, or people who are not like us. There's common ground, between almost all people, and that's what we have to build on. Now I don't know. You look at politics and the current situation, and you might not think so. I don't know. I'm kind of given up on politics. It just is a puzzle to me why the most willfully ignorant people, people who are actually proud of their stupidity, seem to get into these positions of political power. I don't know if that's a reflection on their constituents. They think their constituents are all stupid. Well, obviously they are stupid enough to elect them. Or, I don't know, but that's another.
Yeah, we could go on and on about that for sure. But I just... I do want to be mindful of time because we're coming up to the end of our segment, and I have a few last juicy questions I want to ask you. So I love to ask this question, especially of visionary researchers like you. So tell me, in your 30 years of exploring plant hallucinogens, what was the most visionary, out-of-this-world experience that you've had? How did it affect you, and what did you learn from it?
That's a hard one to say. You have to read my book.
Oh, just a tidbit so we can know to buy your book.
Okay, well, it's explained, it's described in great detail in the book. But when I was working with the UDV, in 1991, I attended a conference in Rio, I believe it was, Sao Paulo, and it was hosted by the UDV, the União de Vegetal, which is one of these syncretic churches from Brazil. And it was a conference about many aspects of ayahuasca. This was back in 91, so there were anthropologists, chemists, botanists, and so on, and I was a recently minted graduate student, so I had published on ayahuasca, and I was invited to come to this thing. And after this 3-day conference, they got everyone together in their temple at the end of the conference. The conference was held at a summer camp kind of place right next door to the temple. So everyone got into this temple and took ayahuasca at the end of the conference. This was the big finale. And there were about 500 people in this temple that took it, you know.
That's a lot of people drinking ayahuasca together. I don't think I've ever been in a group that big. That sounds a lot.
Amazing.
Wow!
It was amazing. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop, you know, in this place. But anyway, I had my first really strong encounter with ayahuasca. I had taken it before in Peru. Never really connected with it to this extent that I did there. I guess I was just ready for it. And I had a vision about photosynthesis and about, it was a vision of photosynthesis, which is the process of that plants do, collecting, you know, the energy of the sun and using that to make organic chemistry, to make food, essentially. That's the whole process that drives the biosphere, that keeps that brings energy in from the sun, from outer space, and puts it into a usable form that life can use. You know, Dylan Thomas called this, you know, the green fuse that drives the flower. And it's quite true, you know, it's very apt. It is a fuse. It's plants have evolved this ability to, you know, grab energy, to harness energy, and to use it, you know, I mean, it's a fundamental process. It's kind of a miracle in the sense that everything depends on it. There would be no life on Earth if it wasn't for this. So what I got was a front row seat, actually kind of the front of the roller coaster, actually, the first car in the roller coaster. And it took me through this molecular journey through the process of photosynthesis.
So were you a cell in a plant experiencing photosynthesis? Was that the experience for you?
I was a water molecule in a plant.
Wow!
Through the process of photosynthesis.
That's pretty trippy.
Yeah, the reactants in photosynthesis are water and carbon dioxide and sunlight, right?
And how...
And in the process of photosynthesis, the plant uses the power of sunlight to split water, right? To actually ionize water so that you've got, and the byproduct of that is oxygen, which, lucky for us, because that just escapes and that's what we live on. But then it uses those two hydrogens from water, the H2O, it uses the two hydrogens to reduce carbon dioxide into an organic compound. And that's the miracle right there. It fixes carbon, and that's the process that removes carbon out of the atmosphere. That's why deforestation, you know, is having such an impact on global warming, because we're cutting down the trees that fix all that carbon.
So how did it feel to be a photosynthesizing water molecule?
It was terrifying. It was terrifying because I found myself on a conveyor belt where, you know, I was inside the chloroplast, inside the cell, being shuttled along with all these other molecules, and these bolts of lightning were coming down in front of me and totally smashing these water molecules, you know, into smithereens. And I was one of them.
Oh my god, how long did that last for? It sounds awful.
I don't know. No, it was actually wonderful.
Oh, it was both awful and wonderful. It sounds terrifying and wondrous at the same time.
It was terrifying and wonderful, but it was, yeah, it was very, very moving, because throughout the experience I was getting this narrative of, you know, what was happening, and I was sort of, this is the kind of trip that I guess plant biochemist nerds have, you know, if you understand the processes a little bit. I was getting this narration. Okay, now you're going through photosystem 1, and this is what's happening, and now you're, you know, in photosystem 2 and all that. It's sort of this guy, literally this voice speaking over my left shoulder, kind of explaining to me what was going on, and it was very moving because, at the end of it, I had this whole thing about the Amazon and this whole, sad feeling, that what is going to happen to us? We're doomed if we destroy the Amazon. How can we be doing this? And that was my sense. But then the reassuring voice, literally came at me with this, what I said before, you monkeys only think you're running things. I mean, that's what it said to me, in English, so many words. It said that, and it said, you don't think we're going to let this happen, do you? And then it was extremely cathartic for me, because then I realized, no, we're not running things. We're not running things at all. This plant wisdom that envelops the planet and nurtures the planet and keeps life going on the planet, they're running things. And thank God they are, because, when they stop running things, we're in big trouble. So that was kind of the message, and it was extremely moving, and it was despair and redemption, and it was a fantastic experience. I mean, I have had other experiences, but that one stuck with me, and I've written about it, and I've adopted what it told me is kind of my own mantra. This thing about you monkeys only think you're running things, and it's true.
So how have your visionary experiences connected you with your life purpose, Dennis?
Well, I guess, I mean, in various ways, it's complex, but it's partly, I feel like I become a spokesman for ayahuasca and this point of view, and in the process, I have to become a spokesman for the real threats that face our planetary ecosystem, and especially the Amazonian ecosystem. So on the philosophical side, or on the public side, I guess I'm a crusader, a spokesman, and a speaker about these things. And on the scientific side, I mean, before any of this happened, I was just, as a result of my work with indigenous people and spending time in the Amazon, I'm just very interested in all that biodiversity down there. I mean, there's, there are trillions of dollars worth of new medicines to be found in the Amazon. There are new foods that nobody's used. There's all sorts of resources that could be explored and developed in a way that would improve life on Earth, improve many people's life. But it has to happen from within an ethical framework, right? Because you have to acknowledge and give back something to the indigenous people that have been the keepers of this knowledge for so long. And the usual model up to now has been the corporate predator model. I mean, corporations come in and they'll take the plants and they'll go investigate them, patent them, make billion-dollar drugs out of them. Do the indigenous people ever get even a tiny slice of that pie? No. It's very rare that they give anything back. That's biopiracy, right? We can't be doing this from a standpoint of biopiracy. I mean, it's just not right. So we have to find ways to, empower indigenous people, or somehow at least acknowledge that indigenous people and the plants themselves, I dare say, should have a place at the table. I don't know if you know about the work of the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council.
I've come across that organization in my research around, plant medicines and, psychedelic thought leaders, so to speak. So tell me more about this organization.
Well, they're a relatively new organization. They've been around about 2 years. They're a nonprofit, and basically the the people that have found it have come out of the sort of fair trade NGO sector. They've been involved in fair trade and sustainable development of crops like coffee and chocolate and so on, and that's their expertise and their ethical stance. Basically, they have a double agenda. They want to ensure the sustainability and the quality of ayahuasca and other sacred medicines. They want to foster the propagation of ayahuasca because, you know, so many people want it now. The supplies are actually, well, they're not about to disappear, but there is pressure on them in certain places. So they want to address that. They also want to address best practices for these retreat centers, and they want to, essentially through volunteerism and transparency and consensus and dialogue, they want to give these retreat centers a chance to, you know, voluntarily adhere to some agreed upon best practices, some pretty common sense things, really, that, you know, we're not going to molest women. We're not going to make odd brews that have things like toei and other ingredients in them, you know, that really don't need to be there for...
Toei being datura.
Yeah, like datura.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's it. That's their basic, you know, that's their basic stance. And then they're trying to do it through dialogue. They're developing this ayahuasca health guide, which I think is a good thing. And again, it's something that they, you know, see a need to do, but they invite people to give their input. I like it that it's not like they don't want to be the ayahuasca police, you know, and they can't be anyway. They want to foster a sense of collaboration and cooperation among all these different stakeholders, and that ranges from people that grow it to indigenous shamans to tourists to people that come down and set up these centers. Ultimately, this medicine and you know, the activities that have grown up around it are good things, and they just want to sort of create opportunities to maximize the good and minimize the abuses, which I don't suppose you'll ever get away from completely.
Yeah, I really think it's good to have a set of guidelines. You know, I think especially when you know, as part of this conversation we've had about, you know, the old world meets the new world. I mean, one of the things that the, you know, indigenous shamans and the elders are not prepared to deal with, they don't know really how to, is the fact that, you know, a lot of the Westerners that are showing up in their villages, that are traveling down to the Amazon, they may be on antidepressant drugs and SSRI inhibitors, and, you know, someone that operates a center or a retreat center that, you know, deals more with, you know, the international community may know how to do the health screening and, you know, the health waiver and ask these questions, but the elder shamans don't know. So, you know, so it's good to have that dialogue and to establish some basic set of guidelines so that everyone can have a positive experience.
Right, and that's basically what they're about, you know, is to help with education, develop good practices, certain standards that centers, you know, they're not going to force them to buy into them, but if you want to, you know, be in, you know, if you want to have the ESC seal of good practices on your doorstep or whatever.
Yeah, that's a huge, you know, trust factor, because that the biggest thing for people is they don't know who to go to drink ayahuasca, because there's like so much wrapped around it. Is like the spiritual safety, you know, is the shaman really a shaman, like a curandero, or is he more like a brujo? And then of course it's like the physical safety of like whether or not you're going to be served good medicine. So there's a lot that goes into you know, selecting who it is that you drink ayahuasca with and where you go. And I get people that ask me all the time, and after having so many, kind of disappointing experiences in the West, I no longer recommend groups in the West to drink with. I might recommend, some centers down in South America, in Brazil or in Peru, but a lot of the people who are asking me, are not going to be able to make that trip to go down there. So I think it's an excellent.
There are some good places in North America too. I mean, there are some good centers in North America. I don't know. I don't pretend to know of all of them, but I know of a few where they're doing good work, but they have to be completely under the radar.
That's the thing, you can't figure out like which centers are doing the good work, because it's not like they can list on their website, and it's all word of mouth, and then there's the whole getting endorsements, when everything's all on the down low. Yeah, there's one center that I would recommend to people that I know of, that I think they hold a really clean work. But yeah, it's hard when everything's kind of clandestine like that, especially in North America.
Right. So that's one of the things that we need to do, and actually that's kind of happening. There's one lawyer who helped the UDV and the Santo Daime get their recognition for using ayahuasca as a religious practice in the States. So those religions are legal. They can use ayahuasca, right? But not everybody wants to join one of those churches. I'm one of them. I'm not a churchgoer.
Me neither. I respect their work, but
But I am, this lawyer that I'm working with, I'm a consultant. There are several other people. He's trying to make the case that curanderismo, or vegetalismo, as practiced in Peru, is a bona fide religious practice, and it should be protected along with these other practices. It's a tougher case to make because there's no church, there's no buildings, there's no doctrine,
there's no outfits.
But it's clearly a religious practice, and so it should be protected. And if they get that approved, then that will effectively make these centers in the States legitimate and legal. And I think that's also a good thing. I think that you should try to interview Josh Wickerham. He's one of the founders of the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council.
Yes, I would love to have an introduction to Josh and discover more about that work. I think I recall seeing that organization crop up on my radar maybe over a year ago, when they were asking for people to, participate in this dialogue they were having.
Well, they just hosted this World Ayahuasca Conference in Ibiza.
Oh, I was going to go to that. Actually, my good friend, Sia Hunaquin, who's the, I guess people would refer to him as a chief. He's a cacique of the Hunaquin indigenous, the Kaxinawa indigenous territories of Upper Jourdain in Brazil. And he was at that conference, so I was kind of bummed not to go, but it was not in my trajectory around the world this time around. But yes, maybe next year.
It was a great conference.
Wow.
I should have been there. I was there. It was very good.
Wow.
You don't need an introduction to Josh. I mean, he'll be happy to talk to you if you just write him.
Okay, all right. I'll reach out.
I'm happy to give you an introduction, but it's not necessary. I mean, he'll talk to anybody. He's the spokesman for ESC. That's his job.
All right. Well, I always appreciate intros because it's much more personable. But
sure,
yeah. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and your stories and your insights and information. How can we best stay in touch with you, Dennis?
Well, I have. It's not that easy. I have a website for my book, which is called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. You can order it from Amazon. You can order it from that website. And I have a Facebook page for that. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, is through that Facebook page.
Fantastic.
Or you can email me through the Hefter Research Institute. So that's dennis@hefter.org, and they'll pass it along. I don't give out my personal email, although I don't know. I'm buried in email all the time, so it's I'm sure you know how that goes. But those are good ways to reach me. I'm not hard to reach.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Dennis, and you have a beautiful evening.
Okay, you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.